So, welcome back to the Machine Learning Street Talk YouTube channel and podcast with my two compadres, Letizia, the animated AI coffee bean, and make sure you subscribe to her channel, and Yannick Lightspeed Kilcher. Now, today we're talking with Hugo Touveron. Hugo is currently a PhD student at Facebook AI Research in Gay Paris and in the machine learning team in the Computer Science Laboratory at Sorbonne University. He received a Science Masters in Applied Mathematics, Machine Learning and Computer Vision from the Paris-Saclay University and a postgraduate engineering degree from the Superior National School of Advanced Techniques. Now, today we're going to talk about the Data Efficient Image Transformers paper, or DEIT, which Hugo is the primary author of. One of the recipes of success for vision models since the DL revolution began has been the availability of large training sets. CNNs have been optimized for almost a decade now, including extensive architecture search, which is very prone to overfitting. So, motivated by the success of transformers-based models in natural language processing, there's been an increasing attention, all puns intended, in applying these approaches to vision models. So lift and shift, or hybrid architectures if you like, swapping out the convnets for transformers to solve vision tasks. For example, the VIT transformer from Google, which was recently proposed. Now, the VIT paper presented excellent results on ImageNet with raw image patches as input without using any convolutions at all, which is closing the gap significantly with CNNs, although it still needed training on a very large private curated data set. So the VIT paper concluded that transformers do not generalize well when trained on insufficient amounts of data. Their parameter efficiency seemed much lower than convnets. But Hugo and his collaborators have apparently escaped this limitation using a different training strategy and a new distillation token with the same architecture. Hugo reported large improvements, citing careful choice of hyperparameters and repeated data augmentation as being crucial to their success. He also addressed the issue of how to distill these models using a novel transformer-specific token-based strategy, which is significantly better than the vanilla alternative. And we'll get Hugo to explain exactly what that strategy is, but for now, think of distillation as just compressing a bigger model into a smaller one. So, distilled models give significantly higher throughput while maintaining surprisingly high accuracy. And interestingly, Hugo discovered that with this distillation approach, image transformers learn more from a convnet than from another transformer with comparable performance. And what's more, these new models are competitive when fine-tuned on different downstream tasks like CFAR, etc. So the exciting thing is that these transformers are already on a par with CNNs, right? And with fewer hacks and fewer inductive biases, just imagine how far they could go. Anyway, Hugo Touveron, it's an absolute pleasure. Welcome to the show. How did this all come about for you?
In DIT, there is two parts in the paper. The first part on the training strategy. We had a lot of regularization to improve the performance. And the second part, it's on the distillation, where we introduce a new token. In the first part, we try a different combination of regularization. We do a very extensive ablation in the paper. The most important component is the repeated augmentation, but maybe if we adapt some other parameters, it is maybe possible to have a good performance without that. But we keep in your ablation all times the same hyperparameter. Therefore, there is sometimes some combination of methods that doesn't work. For instance, when we remove a stochastic depth or random erasing in your table, the models doesn't converge. But if you try to change the learning rate, try to change the weight decay, maybe you can have a model that converge. But we don't do that because there is a lot of grids. To do that, we have to do a lot of grid search for each row, and it's not the goal of the paper. The first part it's to have a good basis to start the second part. In the second part, we take exactly the same hyperparameter. First, we tried the soft distillation, but we have some problem with the soft distillation. The soft distillation is the usual distillation with the soft output of the teacher. But with the soft distillation, we have not very good performance, maybe because the loss with the soft distillation is a little bit far from the classical loss. Maybe to have a good soft distillation, you have to change a lot of hyperparameter. We don't do that. We prefer to change to hard distillation. It's super simple. You don't have any parameter. You don't have a temperature. You don't have a balancing ratio between the green truth label and the output of the teacher. You take only the argmass of the teacher and you set that like a labels. But the advantage of this label, the teacher will take into account the data augmentation. For instance, if your random resize crop take a part of the image with another element, the output will change according to that. Therefore it's not equal to take only the green truth labels.
If I understand you correctly, you do all this data augmentation, and sometimes the data augmentation, because we always assume that data augmentation doesn't change the label, right? That's kind of the core assumption behind it. But if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is if you do such strong data augmentation that the image actually changes the label, the teacher will reflect that. Is that do I understand you correctly?
Yes, exactly.
Kind of a filter for data augmentation. Have you tried, how far you can push this data augmentation until this sort of thing breaks? It seems with a strategy like this, you could potentially, augment until the picture doesn't even resemble a natural image anymore. Do you have any idea of how far you could push this?
We don't try more data augmentation, but our round augment is already very strong.
And you talk about repeated augmentation. What do you mean by repeated?
With repeated augmentation, we have for each image 3 repetition of the same image with different data augmentation. This technique is proposed in a CVPR paper. It helps it works like a regularizer. And
so what do you do with these 3 different things? Are they in the same batch? Like, are they? Sorry.
No, they are not on the same batch, but I do that because originally I use repeated augmentation with ConvNet and batch norm. I think with layer norm is not a problem, but currently in my implementation, the different augmentation are in the same batch, but not on the same GPU.
Okay. Wow, we made such a deep dive into the paper right now, and you have led us through a marathon of, the whole paper. We could continue the data augmentation part because there I think you have a very interesting point where you refer to your previous work. But I actually wanted, to start more with the beginning, like, why do you even think about transformers on images and on ImageNet? Did you have an intuition that this would achieve state of the art, and how did you get the idea?
We want to work with transformer because there is less hard bias. Transformers are more flexible than ConvNet because there is not hard-coded convolution, etc. Therefore, we try to work with transformer in image classification.
Okay, cool. So yeah, transformers are in a sense more flexible. I think Tim also said in the introduction that you don't really use any convolutions. And I made a YouTube video about your DEIT paper, and I also said, there's no convolutions, but like, the most repeated comment I got to the YouTube video was, wait, but there is a convolution, because when you extract those image patches that you then transform to these image tokens and feed them to the transformer, you kind of apply the same matrix multiplication to every patch. And they said, wait, there is a convolution. What's your opinion to that?
Yes, yes, we can see the patch extraction as a convolution, but it's a convolution with a kernel of size 18 and a stride of size 16. A kernel of size 16, a stride 16. Yes, we can see the first layer as a convolution.
Sure, but I don't think that's like refuting the point that there is no convolution, because in the beginning you just have no idea or no better prior how to transform this image patch to an image token, so you just apply the same transformation to every patch. But do you imagine, like in a self-driving car scenario where the sky is on top and that's not the most interesting part for a self-driving car, and the bottom of the image is where the stuff is happening, that there you might transform the patches that are on top differently than the patches that are on the bottom? Or is that a bad idea?
Good idea. Maybe it's interesting to have a different treatment of the different parts. It's a good question.
Or do you think that the transformer can figure it out itself with these positional embeddings or geometrical embeddings? How do you call them in your paper?
We learn the position encoding like in the VIT papers, but it's possible to use, for instance, a sinusoid for the position encoding. I think in the VIT paper they try that. There is an ablation in the appendix of the VIT paper on a different thing about the position encoding.
I think it's fascinating because Laetitia jogged my memory just before you came on. Yannick was saying there's a new paper out from DeepMind on model-based reinforcement learning called Dreamer, I think you said, Yannick. And I think, much to your chagrin, it was almost just pushing the problem of the inductive biases into a different place, because you know, we say in this case that we're not using convolutions anymore, but in a sense we are. So we want to have a completely blank slate. We want to be data driven, but there's this bias variance trade-off. We have to make assumptions in lots of different places in order for machine learning models to work at all. So how far can we go towards being completely data driven?
Sorry, I don't understand really well your question.
Sorry. So you said one of the advantages of a transformer is that there are fewer inductive biases. A CNN has quite an obvious inductive bias around local weight sharing and so on, translational equivariance. Transformers have fewer inductive biases, but I suppose we can all agree, because of the bias variance trade-off, we have to have certain assumptions. There are no predictions without assumptions. We're always going to have biases. So how far can we go towards not having any assumptions at all?
Yes. With transformer, you have to try to induce the biases to have this compartment, but don't have hard biases like in transformer, to have to be able to learn something that is more flexible. It's my opinion. For instance, with the convnet distillation, we try to induce the convolutional bias inside the transformer. We want a transformer that work a little bit like a convolutional neural network. Therefore, we try the distillation with the convnet teacher.
So that is actually a really interesting part. And also, if I recall correctly, you distill different models into transformers, and the transformer benefits much more from the convolutional model than from a transformer model. It's conceivable that is exactly because it kind of induces. The convolutional model helps to induce that, but why do you think the transformer couldn't learn that by itself, like the teacher transformer? Do you think there's not enough data? Is that a thing we could fix with more data?
Maybe with a teacher transformer, this improve a little bit the performance, but in our experiment, it's better to try with a ConvNet. But we don't try, for instance, to take a very big transformer to distill it inside the smaller transformer. Maybe this should work, but we don't try that. We try only the same transformer as teacher and equivalent ConvNet, and we show that ConvNet are better, but we don't try a lot of experiment with that.
So with regard to this distillation, that is one novelty in your paper, right? The exact method you do this distillation, and you have this distillation token. Do you want to maybe just explain a bit more what that is? It's pretty simple, and maybe why it helps, because it's quite astonishing. It's quite cool.
Yes, we introduce a distillation token. It works exactly like the class token. The class token is an artificial token used to aggregate the information of the pages thanks to the attention. And at the end, we use only this token for the prediction. The distillation token has the similar comportment, but with the distillation, we use the class token with the true labels and the distillation token with the output of the teacher. And we have the distillation token learn more about the teacher. For instance, if we check the output of a class token and a distillation token, the agreement between the teacher output between the class token and the distillation token, it's more important with the distillation token. The output of the distillation token is closer to the output of the ConvNet teacher than the class token. I think therefore this can help because we have a part more similar to transformer comportment and a part more similar to the ConvNet comportment, and at the end we aggregate the two prediction.
One fascinating thing is you said in your paper that, well, you said, interestingly, we observed that the learned class and the distillation tokens converge towards different vectors, and that surprised you. So why is that?
Yes, at the beginning they are different. I think because they are different. The class token have to find the ground truth label, but the distillation token have to find the output of the teacher. I think therefore they learn a different thing in the attention in the different part of the transformer. Because the ground truth labels and the output of the teacher are quite different, because there is a data augmentation. We use cut mix and mix up. Therefore, there is a very, very strong data augmentation on the images with a mix of different images. Therefore, the labels and the output of the argmax output of the teacher, I think are very different.
And do you see like the characteristic or the fingerprint of the teacher model also in the features that are learned by the student? Like, do you see CNN features or more CNN-like features emerging when there's a CNN teacher, and more transformer-like features, whatever they are, when there's a transformer teacher? Or
we don't check the feature, but in the two case, in the case without distillation, the models learn some filter close to ConvNet filter. It's shown in the VIT paper, for instance.
So is it fair to say that the model needs at the same time, it needs to sort of predict what the teacher does, and it also needs to figure out what the ground truth label is, and then via the attention mechanism, these two tasks, they can inform each other. So the model can sort of pass information around about, okay, I think the teacher thinks it's a cat, but, so the classification can be informed by this. Do you think that can be a general method? Because technically we could make a CNN, we just build a different head on top of it or something and have it predict the teacher and the class label, whereas in usual distillation, you just have the one output. Do you think that can be a more general method here? Or do you think there's something very specific about transformers and about attention in this extra task?
It's a good question. We try only with transformer, but it's possible to adapt the method for ConvNet, but we don't try. But yes, it's possible to try that with ConvNet.
Now, I could come to the data augmentation that we talked a little bit in the beginning. You're doing something very interesting. You're training and fine-tuning at different resolutions. Why is that?
It's a method in one previous paper. It's in the fixed race method. We use a higher resolution for the fine-tuning because in the classical training procedure, you use a random resize crop. It takes a crop between 8% and 100% of the original images. Therefore, when at training time, you have a higher resolution because, for instance, if you take an image of size, for instance, 500 by 500, and take 8% of these images and resize the 8% to 224, you have a resolution higher than at test time, because at test time, if you have an image of size 500 by 500, the first step is to resize the image and take the center crop. Therefore, there is a discrepancy between the training strategy and the testing strategy. Therefore, you have to try to fix that with the fine-tuning.
I really love this approach, and I would recommend to anyone to read your paper, Fixing the Train Test Resolution Discrepancy, and look at this figure where you really you show it how in training 224 pixels are just the horse, but then during testing the 224 pixels are the horse is really tiny there somewhere in the whole field. And yeah, I think that when I saw that visualization, it clicked for me. And you apply this to your transformer. So you train first on lower resolution and then you fine tune on higher resolution, right?
Yes.
And I'm just curious about this fine tuning, because fine tuning is usually meant to be like converging a little faster and training on not so much data than the normal training. I mean, this is a rule of thumb. Do you see that too, or does this fine-tuning need a much larger training procedure?
No, with the fine-tuning, we fine-tune during 30 epoch, and we keep the distillation in the fine-tuning for the distilled models. It's helped a little bit. We try both, but if you keep the distillation for the fine-tuning, you have a better result. But you have to only fine-tune during 30 epoch with a smaller learning rate, and this improve the performance.
So your paper is called the training data efficient image transformers, and data efficiency for you means you only have ImageNet, right? You have just ImageNet, whereas, for example, the VIT paper had ImageNet plus the JFT 300 million dataset and so on. Deep learning has come quite a way in terms of what data efficient means. ImageNet used to be a huge data set, right? And now it's like, oh, you only have ImageNet, you must be doing something really data efficient. Do do you think how far down can we go? Like, if for ImageNet, can we go, from scratch CIFAR10? Can we go even lower? Because, there are many applications, medical images and so on. How data efficient can we get?
We try with CIFAR10 and we have some good results. For instance, with training from scratch on CIFAR10 with a ConvNet teacher trained also from scratch on CIFAR10, we reach 19.8.5. Well, it's not too bad on CIFAR10. Because in CIFAR10 there is only 50,000 images.
Do you see we could go down to less? Do you see we could go down to like 1,000 images, like without transfer learning? Where do you see the limit of kind of data efficiency with transformers?
I think there is 2 points. Transformers are very sensitive to the optimization procedure because we don't have find again all the good training recipe to train transformer. Currently, ConvNet are very more stable. Therefore, the limit we can try to train on smaller dataset, but if you have bad performance, maybe it's not due to the leak of data, but it can be due to the bad hyperparameter. It's hard to have a good conclusion with transformer. Maybe your idea is good, but you don't have the good hyperparameters.
There have been a couple of additional ImageNet datasets created. I watched Yannick's video on the OpenAI. Oh God, the avocado sitting on a chair. What was it? DALL-E. Sorry, it slipped my mind for a second. But the main thing they were showing there is that, or maybe they were demonstrating that we have a really big problem in the computer vision world, which is, incredible amounts of overfitting. So we train these models on large amounts of data, and the models and the architectures, they are so overfit to the data sets that they're working on, and then they have no out-of-domain generalization to some of the other variants of ImageNet that are structured in the same way but have different data distribution. So I suppose one of the advantages potentially of having this approach is that we could improve the two number one problems, which is the sample efficiency and the out-of-domain generalization. Are you seeing any kind of indications that is going to happen?
I think it's important to try to validate the approach on different dataset or other validation dataset. For instance, with our ImageNet model, we evaluate all times on ImageNet V2 and ImageNet real labels to see if we overfit ImageNet, because when you try to adapt the learning rate, etc., you can overfit, and I think it's important to measure the overfitting.
When we speak about data efficiency and ImageNet, I am really surprised you really took a transformer. So that was like, wow, when I saw your paper, because if I would have done it, which I totally didn't do, but I wouldn't have taken a transformer. I would have thought about a completely different architecture with all these desirables in the computer vision community, where there's not only translational invariance, but also something like rotation and so on perspective. But yeah, and then you took like exactly the opposite, like the transformer that doesn't have neither of these, right? What kind of invariances does it have, or if it doesn't, can it learn these kinds of things from little data?
Before you answer that, Laetitia, can you give us your intuition on why you thought that a transformer would be data inefficient first? Because there's some intuition there, but why is that?
Yeah, my intuition is that because this transformer doesn't have these inductive biases, it has a much more open solution space. So it kind of can get lost very easily if it doesn't have this huge amounts of data. And I've seen the transformer rise from the NLP community, and there it was totally clear. You just have to throw more and more data at it. So in the testing case, you never land outside of distribution. That is the way to go. And when I think about transformers, it's like more data should help. I shouldn't try the other way around because that's, it's a little counterintuitive. So why did you go with this, and how much of these desirables in the computer vision community does the transformer have in terms of invariances?
The transformers can learn the invariant. With the position encoding, you can learn invariance to rotation, to translation, etc. For instance, if you look in the VIT paper, they look the similarity between the different vector of the position encoding, and you can see there is one position encoding will be more correlated with its neighbor. You can see there is some kind of translation invariance, rotation invariance.
This is really interesting. You're saying that transformers are a blank slate, but we can have our cake and eat it. So we don't put the inductive bias in there. It will learn the inductive bias. And apparently it can learn it efficiently. We've always been taught with the bias variance trade-off that it is a trade-off, right? So the less bias you have, the bigger the space of possibilities, right? So you're saying that, no, we can use this abstract blank slate. It will learn the CNN inductive prior or possibly any other inductive prior, and we win both ways. Is that too good to be true?
Maybe, but if you don't have a lot of data, maybe maybe you have to reduce the size of the transformer and use a lot of regularization to try to learn this inductive bias. But I think it's possible to have a good performance with a few data. But maybe if you have a very few data, transformer maybe can. Don't work, but I think there is also some problems with ConvNet if you don't have enough data.
Do you think that it is almost a bit like cheating because we do so much data augmentation? Do you think that, instead of building our inductive biases into the model itself, we simply build it into the data augmentation procedure because we say, all of these transformations, they are not relevant, which essentially is very similar to just building it into the model. But, maybe we humans, we are much better at transforming the data than, building the correct model for a given symmetry. Do you think is this what's happening?
Yes, maybe. Because the transformer is very flexible, and with the data augmentation, you will teach the transformer to learn some invariants. For instance, I think I can use more data augmentation with transformer than ConvNet. For instance, with my current DIT configuration, if you can try to train a ConvNet with this data augmentation, you will have a bad performance. Because I think it's too strong. It's a too strong data augmentation for a ConvNet.
Maybe stepping back a little, when I first read, just the title of your paper, and it said something like distillation through attention, I imagined some form of, like in ConvNets, there are these approaches where you distill even on the intermediate representation. So you feed a data point through the CNN, and you look at kind of the feature it learns, and you try that the student not only matches the teacher's labels, but it also matches the intermediate representation. Do you think that this could be applied to transformers, and that you could sort of match the attention matrices or something like this? Because there's a lot of information in these attention matrices. Or do you think that you should let the student discover all of this themselves? What's your intuition here? How hard should you teach, basically?
That's a good question. I think there is. It's a good idea to try to learn some feature of the ConvNet at a different level of the transformer, but I think it's hard to find a matching between the two architecture, because, for instance, the feature map of a RESTnet are not similar to embedding in the transformer, because for instance in the transformer you don't have done sampling, or you work all time at the same with the same pages. You apply only attention and feed forward network, but in the ConvNet you change the size of the feature. I think it's hard to find a correspondence between the two architecture, but maybe it's possible to construct something to have this correspondence and do the distillation like that. But we don't try that, but maybe it's interesting.
That is actually it is a very interesting topic, because it's almost like there are two schools in deep learning, where one group argues that basically all the deep learning systems learn the same things, right? They learn the same features in one way or another. Because if you want to solve the task, you need to somehow extract the same kind of or similar sort of information. So it is conceivable that no matter which architecture you use, you're going to learn the same kinds of features. And for example, there is good arguments that this happens, and that's why adversarial examples, for example, transfer between architectures, because ultimately the architectures learn the same features. On the other hand, you have a bunch of people saying there are an almost infinite amount of relevant features that you could classify images by. So, and it is very conceivable that different architectures solve the task in a completely different way. And which one in these things, which one do you think is happening? Given your experiments, do all architectures learn the same features, or do they solve the task in very different ways?
Good question. I think, for instance, with ConvNet, architectures that are very different, for instance, EfficientNet, ResNet, etc., will learn to classify maybe differently. For instance, if you do ensembling, I think it's better to have an ensemble with different architecture than to have an ensemble with the same architecture, because there is more diversity in the prediction. Maybe the amount of feature to classify is not infinite, but a very different architecture can learn in different way.
Do you think there is a way to leverage this? Do you think for example, in your case, could you have multiple teachers and then multiple of these distillation tokens? Do you think there is ever a single architecture that can learn all the features, or do you think there's a step beyond ensembling that we can make use of all of these different architectures, different things of solving the tasks?
We don't try with a different teacher, but it's a good idea. You can try to add a multiple distillation token and try multiple teacher for the distillation. I don't know if it works, but maybe, yes.
Like multitask distillation.
Yes.
Stepping more back a little bit, you are a PhD student at Facebook, which is something that is not super common, right? I think usually in these larger companies you have researchers that already have their PhDs, or maybe you have interns if you actually want to do an internship from your university. How does a PhD look like doing it, from a university, but actually in these large companies? You probably hear a lot from other PhD students. What is different for you, and what is the same, and what is better and what is worse?
We have a lot of freedom at Facebook. We work like in an academic labs. For instance, I work with my Facebook advisor like I work with my academic advisor from the Sorbonne University.
So do you feel any product drive from from Facebook? It is a company, right? At the end of the day, they need they make money, and they want to build products. Do you feel there is a product pressure on you, or is it really like in a university?
No, it's very like the university.
I think the reason for that is all of the stuff that we're working on here has such a direct and obvious link to something which is profitable. Then they don't even need to say it explicitly. Just carry on, keep doing what you're doing. Because, yeah, I'm joking, but all of these transformers models and these vision models, they are incredibly useful to a company like Facebook because they have the data, they have the platform.
Yes, they can be useful, but in our work we are really free. We don't have to apply our work for production. We have. I work like in an academic lab.
And how long is the PhD program usually?
3 years.
And is that the rule, or is that like the mean of time that people need to complete their PhD?
No, in France we have a specific program to do PhD in a company. And this program have a duration of 3 years.
Okay, so it's like 3 years to the date, to the day.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because in academia in other countries like Germany, it's like 3+. And okay, good. It's very good that you have a very structured, time-wise PhD.
Yeah, if you didn't do this Transformers project, what else would interest you?
I will continue to work on transformers in computer vision.
But what if you didn't?
Because there is a lot of things to do with a transformer in computer vision.
What if I just I ran like a bash shell on your brain and I said Dell Transformers ****. So imagine you didn't know anything about Transformers. What would you do?
Invent a transformer. Come on, Tim.
Yeah. If it didn't exist, we would have to invent it.
I work with ConvNet on image classification, but only with ConvNet, not transformers. But I don't know on what I work. Currently I work on transformer, and if there is no transformer, I don't know on what I work. Maybe I try to improve the image classification with ConvNet with other technique.
Very cool.
You are focused on image only, right? Even though the transformer comes from text in a sense, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you don't plan to kind of bridge modalities and so on. Because what I find super interesting about a transformer is that it was the Attention is All You Need paper was published, and then not much afterwards. I have to really check the reference, but there is this image transformer paper coming out from many of the same authors of the Attention is All You Need paper, where they use transformers for image generation. And they had some troubles getting that paper accepted because it wasn't like, it's a transformer, we get it accepted, because transformers weren't that notorious just yet, especially in computer vision. So transformers in computer vision kind of got lost or forgotten, and people didn't focus so much on it. And now it's the time. I mean, it's your time. It's the VIT paper, it's the DEIT paper, then it's CLIP and it's DALI, and that are combining vision and language, and it's like, wow, this is the time where transformers start to get applied everywhere. I am interested in this vision and language fusion, and I also saw, for example, the transformer being applied on vision and language. So it was like transformers on text, transformers on vision, but got forgotten. Then it was super notorious to do this VilBERT and VisualBERT and LXMERT, which are transformers on both vision and language. And then the transformer on only vision came again. So that's my question, that you have these image tokens, like you have them in your DEIT paper too, but extracted differently. These multimodal transformers used a faster RCNN that extracted a vector. But you have a vector from the image. And also you have a sequence of 200 or 100 image tokens, and then you have a sequence of your text tokens, but usually the text tokens are like 20 or 30. So you have 20 text tokens, 100 or 200 image tokens. You just feed them to a transformer and learn these cross-modal representations. By the experience you have gotten now with like image tokens only, do you think that this huge difference in the number of image tokens and the number of textual tokens, can that give rise to problems? Like, would you do it somewhat differently?
Good question. I don't know if there is a problem of having a different amount of token between text and images, but in images, and I think in text also, there is some problems with very long seconds. For instance, if you try to use DIT with very high resolution images, we'll have a very long sequence, and the attention have a quadratic complexity. Therefore, you will have some problem with the memory and the speed of the models. But I think there is some people that can try to change the complexity of the attention to have better performance in NLP. But I think in maybe some NLP techniques can be used for image transformers.
So you mean something like Linformer, Performer, and so on, these kinds of cool. And could you just remind us, what is your length of image tokens? How many do you feed into the EIT?
For image of size 224, we use 196 patch token and one class token.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks.
So this seems a bit like, the transformers are very cool, and the end tokens are very cool, and the masked language modeling in transformers is very cool. This seems a bit like someone just did whatever first thing that came to mind. Like, I'm just going to divide the image into these patches, and I'm just going to take each patch, and that's now a token, right? Or, a patch or a word in NLP language. Do you think there are improvements to be made there, or is this simplicity kind of even a feature?
I think there is maybe a lot of improvement. We can do a lot of improvement for this part in the transformer. For instance, there is a lot of hybrid architecture with ConvNet to extract the feature and transformer to work on this feature. In this case, the feature are not a page of the images, but a feature from a ConvNet. I think there is a lot of things to do with the patch extraction. Maybe it's better to use hybrid architecture, I don't know, or use a different way to extract the pages, etc.
So, bit of a random question. You're working at Facebook Research, and you are a connectionist. Pedro Domingos was telling us that there are many tribes in artificial intelligence. And I'm quite interested, like, from your point of view, what you think the biggest challenges are, and just to kind of preempt a little bit. So someone like Francois Chollet, who advocates for program search, he'll say, well, the lack of generalization and the information conversion ratio is the problem. Or a symbolist would say the lack of reasoning and understanding is the problem. Or a neuroscientist would say, well, it's not biologically inspired. Or a Bayesian person would say, well, there's no causality, or the ladder of causation. And an evolutionary person would say, oh, there's no diversity, preservation and open-endedness. And a philosopher or a cybernetics person like we had last week would say, oh, humans can feel, think and understand in a way that computers can't. So you've got all these different people criticizing what we do. From your perspective, what is the problem with what you're doing?
How to extract the information in the images in the better way. What is the better way to extract the information in the images without prior? How to learn to extract information in the images only with the learning procedure. I think it's a very interesting, and I think it's for instance with Transformer we have to find the best architecture to extract information, to extract the information in the image.
How far do you think we can go with this? Like I see the point, like the task is clear, extract the best or find the best way to extract information out of the image with only data, right? No, or as little prior as possible. Do you think that will get us, do you think that's a general recipe, or does this end somewhere? Because as Tim says, there are people who say, no matter how much data we put in, there is knowledge that is not in the data, right? There is kind of logical reasoning and so on that we need to teach the kind of, if we want to reach something like an AGI, we can't just do it without data. Do you agree, or do you think that, this approach of how to get the most information out of the data can get us, really far?
A good question. I think we are maybe far to have the optimal solution to extract the feature information from the image in the optimal way. Maybe we need to have maybe another architecture, another way to do that. I don't know.
Amazing. Well, in which case, I think we should draw this to a close. So, Hugo, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute honor, and I hope to see you on the show again soon. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Right.
This was fun.
So,